This is the Prophecy Project. Understanding the times, the nations in military conflicts, with Bible teacher and author Alan Bonk.
Welcome to session number 19 of the Prophecy Project. Last session, I went through what I called the Herod syndrome, the attempts by God's enemies to change the future in opposition to the will of God, to change times and laws. I also covered Daniel chapter 8. We looked into the two beasts, one which was a ram and had two horns, which are two kings. The chapter interpreted that ram as the Medes and the Persians literally told us. And history shows that the two kings that fulfilled that scripture are Cyrus and Darius. The ram was defeated by an he-goat with one notable horn between his eyes. The horn was broken and four stood up in its place. This goat is shown to be the king of Grecia. The king of Grecia is historically called Alexander the Great. He fulfilled that. He died as a young man in Babylon. His four generals divided his empire into four, just as the scriptures show. The vision continues until the last days, when another little horn comes up out of one of the four kings and his empire. The little horn will cause the sacrifice to cease in God's temple at Jerusalem. Now, we know from previous sessions that the vile fourth king from Persia is the one who causes the sacrifices to cease. He is also known and called the Assyrian. So, the little horn of Daniel 8 is in fact the Assyrian. We also looked into the timing of the vision of the daily sacrifice. We saw that 2,300 days, slightly less than 7 years, constitutes the event or the vision. The sacrifices will cease, be stopped, at the midpoint of the 70th year, Daniel's 70th week. And the temple is desecrated or trodden down for 42 months, or 1,260 days, 3.5 years, at which time the Messiah will come and the temple will be cleansed. Now, 2,300 days back from the end of the vision would be the start of the sacrifices or the beginning of the vision, and also the existence of the rebuilt, dedicated temple of the last days. The temple which John is told to measure when he was in Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. The result of all of this means that the rebuilt temple will be complete 7 months and 10 days after the covenant is made with the Assyrian, Israel's covenant of death. And it appears that this is part of the agreement made. It is part of the incentive for Israel to make it, that they would receive a temple. Now, I want to cover the beasts of Revelation, or the beast of Revelations, and see what truths about Asher we can find from that beast. Now, it's an in-depth study, very complex, and we cannot hope to cover all that in this session. I may be able to, at some point in some future session, detail it. But we can get a good feel for the subject today, and we will see how it dovetails in with Daniel's accounts of the Assyrian. The accounts in Revelation doesn't show Asher as anything but a beast. Doesn't show him as just a man or a man of peace. We only see him and his kingdom and followers in their totally apostate condition at the end of the age. We'll start in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon its horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet like unto a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. Now, this beast has the same 10 horns, just as Daniel's vision in chapter 7. Only now we see that the fourth beast has absorbed the first 3, the lion, the bear, and the leopard. They're identical. So there's now only one beast. Verse 3. And I saw one of the heads, one of the 7, as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Verse 4. And they, the world, worshipped the dragon, who is Satan, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Now remember, in earlier sessions, we talked about the Assyrian, how he subdues the world, and that there's no one who even peeps when he's done. The sad part, of course, of these verses is the fact that the world worships Satan, and his personification, Ashur the Assyrian, also. It is also clear that the Ashur receives his power from Satan. It's not his own power. Verse 5. And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. This is the last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. Verse 6. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. Verse 7. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given unto him over all the kindred and tongues and nations. This is certainly in time. Verse 8. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. These people do not have salvation. Verse 9. If any man have an ear, let him hear. Verse 10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Now, the beast, I want to paraphrase this. The beast that has taken the world captive will, in the end, be taken into captivity himself. He that has been killing men over all the world will, at the end, be killed with a sword. And it says, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. That is to say, the saints must be patient and keep the faith that God will put everything right in the end. Verse 11 shows us another beast that takes on the cause of the beast and seems to be dedicated to God's defeat. Verse 11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, not out of the sea, but out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. He looks like a lamb or like a godly person, but his mouth betrays him. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and that's Satan's power, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Verse 13. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. Verse 14. And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, and that which had the wound and of the sword, but did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This image is set up in the temple. This is what we would call the abomination of desolation. Verse 16, And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Verse 17, and that no man might buy or sell, save he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. I want to stop right here and just say that basically these are three different levels of commitment and sealing for the people. There are people who just get a mark, and then there are people who have the name and then the number of the name. So each one of these people, somehow there's a distinction amongst them, perhaps amongst their fidelity to the beast. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding, verse 18, understand and count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 600, threescore, and 6, or as we say, 666. No mention of this false prophet is seen in the Old Testament. This information gives us insight into the signs and the wonders spoken of in Daniel, and how they take place and who's behind them. The economic restrictions placed on the world and the sealing of the people both come during the last 42 months of this age, or 3.5 years, the latter part of Daniel's 70th week. Now, the number of his name takes on a new meaning when you realize he's an Assyrian. The Assyrian numbering system is a base 60 system, with a base 10 system from 1 to 59, and then the next part, the next place over, would be 60s, and then the next place 3600. All of the numbers are made using only two symbols, basically a 1 and a 10. A decimal transliteration of the Assyrian 666, if you were to write it in decimal form, is 11.1 or 111. Being 11 times 60, which equals 660, and 0.1 times 60, which equals 6. The Assyrian language, Aramaic, also has the same letters as Hebrew. It is, in fact, Proto-Hebrew, came before the Hebrew. And it has the same dual meanings as letters and numbers. You can actually take a letter and it'll have a number meaning. The Assyrian king, Sargon the Great, the historical king, is the only documented historic king to have a number for his name. It was found on the wall of his old city, Dar Sharukin. Sargon is his biblical name, but his Assyrian name is Sharukin, which means the legitimate king. It's highly likely that this last day's Assyrian king will use the title of Sharukin at some point in his rule. It's just something that I thought I'd throw in for you. Now, I want to tell one man's story. We sometimes only see his apostate condition. This might help kind of make an understanding of who he is. In my book, I have an entire chapter dedicated to summarizing Asher's life and story. But I will be brief in closing this session with this. First, we know that he will be a Persian citizen, which in the last days will mean that he is an Iranian citizen, but not a Muslim. He is an Assyrian by birth, and virtually all Assyrians are Christian. And Asher receives a call or a charge from the Christian God to do things for him. The Assyrians that live in Iran live in the Assyrian enclaves of the north, the Lake Urmia area. The Assyrians in that area, though it's not just in that area, but all over the Middle East, suffered an attempted genocide by the Turks of the Ottoman Empire and the Kurds. At the end of World War I, 1918 basically is when it happened. It was a serious attempt and resulted in significant losses and loss of life for the Syrian people, while accounts vary in just how many people have died. it probably left only a few thousand in Iran. These remnants would have been traumatized by the experience and left as a second-rate citizen in the Islamic nation. Asher's grandfather would have probably been a survivor of this event. Asher and his father would have heard and understood firsthand what had happened, and who did it, and who helped them, and who did not help them. As it is, the Assyrians fought as allies with the English, with England during World War I, and many Assyrians felt that they had been promised a nation by the Brits when the war was over, which never happened. The war got over, but they were never given their land back. They feel betrayed by them and the nations of the world in general. This betrayal and the humiliation and wounds of the genocide itself would be felt by Asher, be part of who he is in his upbringing. While I believe that the Assyrian people as a whole, as a nation, have done a remarkably good job of forgiving and moving on, an attribute, I believe, of their Christian faith, Asher, the man, will, in his latter days, and when given a chance, he will seek to destroy nations, not a few. I think his anger is the fruit of unforgiveness and a grudge, as it turns out, against God himself for allowing the event to happen at all. Initially, just surviving would be the goals of most Assyrians, not just in Iran, but around the world, just making ends meet and surviving. But after a couple of generations, the Assyrian people are beginning to desire their homeland back. They need, of course, to organize and begin to lay the proper foundation for a new government and all the institutions that are associated with it. We are told that Asher will found it for them. We covered this in earlier sessions. He, I believe, will be at the forefront of the Assyrian nationalist movement at the end of times, probably their leader. He comes to prominence through a small ethnic people within Iran. This is the Assyrian people of Iran. By prominence, I mean political power and position. But as an Assyrian, he could never become just the leader of Iran because he's not Islamic. But as long as Iran has an Islamic republic, it could not happen. The current government will need to be replaced by something more secular, more open to receiving someone besides a Muslim. Asher will probably lead or be a part of that transition as well. We're told that he uses peace and flattery to overthrow his enemies and to take power away from them. He will expand his influence to include the 10 commanders of the military alliance of the old Christian nations of the north, Europe, and the Holy Roman nations. He will use that relationship to enter in and conquer the Middle East. This alliance will be the subject of the next 5 sessions of the Prophecy Project. In the meantime, we can watch current events in the Middle East and in Iran, and specifically look for the rise of such a man. He will look anything like a beast at this time, but he would probably be there. Now, I need to stop here. I need to close this session at this point, but the next session I will cover the final kingdom of man or of men on earth before God sets up his kingdom. We will start my book called Daniel and the NATO Connection for those 5 sessions. Thank you.
This was only one session of many. Be sure to continue watching the Prophecy Project series. If you would like to read more information on this subject, you can find Alan's books on Amazon.com.